The engines hummed across the hangar as smoke hissed from the vents and orange lights flashed in slow rhythm warning all crew to prepare for final countdown, while the massive ship stood tall and ready like a giant silver bird waiting to leave the ground and climb into the stars. And yet one thing was missing, and everyone felt it, but no one dared speak it out loud, not even the captain, standing near the command table, nor the crew buckling in with silent eyes. Near the edge of the platform stood Alara, her boots still dusty from morning drills, her helmet held tightly in both hands. As she watched the others take their place one by one, her heart heavy not with fear, but with something colder, something like being forgotten while still alive. She had trained harder than most, flown in storms others feared, and past tests even instructors failed. But one mistake in the last mission, one bold decision to save a miner's ship, instead of obeying the chain of command, had cost her more than rank, it had cost her trust. And now her name was gone from the flight list. The seat that used to be hers, seat number 7 in the right side cockpit, row stayed empty, lit by a small overhead light, as if it too waited for her return. General Karan stood tall near the launch gate, his back straight, his coat flowing like a flag in the wind. And though his face was like stone, his eyes flicked again and again toward that one empty chair, and then toward the master clock ticking down. The voice on the speaker crackled to life, announcing T-minus 5 minutes to ignition, and the whole hangar buzzed with tension. But no one moved, no one asked why the general still had not boarded. Alara turned to leave, her shoulders stiff, her eyes burning not from tears, but from something else, something sharp and silent. And then the voice echoed again, but not from the speaker. "Where is pilot Alara?" the general asked calmly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade through paper. All heads turned, some confused, some shocked, a few angry. "Sir, she's not on the active roster," the captain replied carefully, his voice tight. "I know," the general said, still not moving, then added, "Bring her to the bridge now." The command team froze. No one moved for a full second, maybe two. Then the junior officer sprinted off toward the observation deck, while others began whispering under breath. Alara stood frozen, her body numb, her brain unable to make sense of what just happened. And then the drone flew in front of her, small, fast, and blinking with blue lights, as it scanned her ID, then said clearly, "Pilot Alara, you are requested aboard by General Karan. Please follow." She wanted to ask why, wanted to say no, even wanted to cry, but instead she took a deep breath, slipped on her helmet, and walked toward the great open bay as the doors hissed wider and the lights shifted from orange to green. As she walked past the crew, she felt their stares, some cold, some curious, a few even hopeful. But no one spoke, not even her old squad mate who had trained with her since the academy. She stepped onto the loading ramp, her heart pounding louder than the engines. Now her eyes locked on that one empty seat, seat 7, still glowing softly, waiting for her. When she reached the bridge, the general looked at her with no smile, no anger, just that same hard, steady gaze. And then he simply nodded toward the seat. "Take your place, pilot," he said without explaining anything, and something in his tone told her it was not a question. She sat down, her hands shaking, just a little, her fingers remembering every button, and switch like old friends reunited. And when she looked forward, the stars outside the glass looked brighter somehow. "T-2 minutes, the voice said again, and this time the captain didn't argue. This time the crew simply followed orders, and the countdown continued. Alara's seat locked into place, the straps clicked, and the console came to life under her touch. And in that moment something shifted inside her, something warm, something real. General Karan moved to his command chair, and without looking back, he said one quiet thing. "Sometimes the mission changes, and sometimes the crew must change with it." Alara said nothing, but she understood, and deep inside where doubt had lived before, something new began to grow like a small fire lighting the cold. As the engines roared to life and the ship began to rise, the empty seat was empty no more, and the stars ahead were no longer out of reach. "You said, please write part 2 of the story, make it more unique and engaging. Using simple and basic English, the part should be exactly 800 words and written in third-person style. Do not use any full stops, dots, anywhere in the text. Ensure the story continues smoothly and keeps the audience hooked from the start." The ship moved through the dark sky, like a silent arrow cutting across black velvet stars, blinking faint behind clouds of space, dust, while inside everything buzzed with quiet tension. Screens flickered soft green and blue lights across every wall and every control, while crew members checked buttons with fast hands and heavy eyes. Ilara sat still in seat, her hands resting on the console, as her heart slowly calmed, but her mind ran wild trying to understand why the general had waited for her, why the countdown had stopped, why the man known for never bending rules had bent one just for her. Beside her, the co-pilot, a tall woman named Reeve, looked straight ahead, her jaw tight, her voice silent, and Ilara could feel the cold air between them like a wall built from doubt and past mistakes. The general's voice came through the earpiece, smooth and clear like ice water. Ilara, meet me in comm room 2 now. No one looked at her as she stood and unbuckled her straps. No one spoke as she walked past rows of focus crew, heads down, eyes locked on screens, but she felt their thoughts floating in the silence. The door to comm room 2 slid open with a soft hiss, and inside the lights were dim, and the general stood alone, arms crossed in front of a glowing screen filled with strange moving patterns and sound waves that pulsed like a heartbeat. He turned only slightly and said softly, "Close the door." Ilara obeyed and waited, the silence between them stretching like a wire pulled tight. "You saved lives on your last mission," the general said without turning, "but you disobeyed protocol, and that shook command trust, even though your choice was right." Ilara blinked, unsure what to say, unsure if she was being scolded or praised. "I removed your name from the roster myself," he continued, "and I did it because I thought your instincts were a threat to order, but then something changed." He pointed to the screen and zoomed in on a wave of strange sound lines mixed with static and strange patterns. "This signal came 3 days ago from deep space, and no one could decode it, not one expert, not one machine. But then I remembered your last flight, your wild guess about frequency layering, and how it saved that minor ship." He turned to her fully now, and his face was still cold, but something flickered in his eyes. "I need your instinct now, Ilara, not your rank, not your record, not your past. I need your way of hearing what others miss." Ilara stepped closer and listened to the sound repeating from the speakers. It was soft, broken, like someone whispering through water, full of clicks and strange hums, but then in the middle of it, she heard something more, something like a voice. She leaned in, and her heart skipped. It was faint, but it sounded like a language she had studied during her time with alien linguist teams, a forgotten dialect from an abandoned outpost near Sector 12. "That sounds like an old peace signal," Ilara said carefully. "It's not a distress call, but more like a warning to stay away." The general nodded slowly and zoomed out to show the signal's source, a dark region of space, with no name, no lights, and no known travel lanes, just a black void between 2 dying stars. "That is where we are going," the general said, and the voice in the silence is what I want you to guide us through. Ilara felt a chill across her skin as she realized the truth. This was no simple mission. This was something deeper, something hidden, and she was not chosen by accident. Back at her station, Reeve gave her a sharp look as she returned, but said nothing, and the rest of the crew still watched her from the corners of their eyes. She sat down again and stared out the window where stars drifted like frozen sparks, and thought about how fast life could turn one moment off the roster the next, holding a ship's fate in her hands. The console blinked with a new message, "Incoming signal detected, weak, but repeating." She opened the feed and listened again, and this time the voice was stronger, clearer, and more urgent, like it knew she was listening now. The general walked past and paused, one hand on her chair, his voice low. "You are not here to follow the book this time. You are here to feel the pattern, to listen between the noise and find the meaning no one else can." Ilara nodded and felt a small fire rise inside her again, not pride, not fear, but purpose, pure and real. As the ship entered the edge of the dark zone and the stars began to fade behind waves of gas and shadow, the voice in the silence grew louder, like it had waited for her all along. The darkness outside the ship was thick like ink poured across glass, and the stars had vanished behind a wall of swirling clouds and broken light, and even the crew who had flown in storms and voids before whispered to each other that this place felt different. Ilara sat still in her seat, her eyes locked on the radar screen, where strange waves moved like dancing shadows, not steady, not right, and every few seconds a soft ping echoed through her headset, a signal from the void that sounded like a voice too far to understand. She adjusted the scanner, tuning it by instinct more than training, following a rhythm in the static, like a whisper through heavy fog. And when the tone shifted, for just 1 second her heart jumped, because the pattern was not random. Beside her, Reeve leaned closer and spoke, without looking. "What is it you hear?" Alara answered slowly. "It's like something is repeating, but not in a way we know, more like memory, trying to reach out, like someone lost trying to speak through sleep." The general's voice cut through the silence. "From command, Alara, report." She stood and walked to the center console, where the general stood, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "So the signal is not distress, it's not attack, it's something else, something old, something layered, and I think is trying to warn not just us, but anyone who comes near." The crew exchanged looks, some raised eyebrows, others glanced nervously toward the window. General Karan turned to the screen and pointed to a spot deep in the data, a pulse hidden between the noise. "There, this code was last recorded 10 years ago. It matches a signal from the Seraphs. Wing a ship, lost with all hands, no wreckage, no distress, call no return." Alara's breath caught as memories rose sharp and sudden. Her old mentor, Captain Ryan, had been on that ship, a man who taught her everything about deep signal mapping and emotional reading in sound. She spoke without thinking. "That ship never sent its last location, but if this is part of its echo, then maybe it never left, maybe it's still out there somewhere inside the storm." The general nodded quietly. "That is why you are here, pilot. You knew him better than any of us. And if that ship is speaking again, we must listen." The crew grew quiet as the gravity of the mission sank in, and even Reeve looked toward Alara, with less cold in her eyes. As the ship moved deeper into the void, lights flickered across the ceiling, and the floor hummed louder than before. Systems showed normal, but something felt off, like the air itself had grown thicker, harder to breathe. One technician near the rear console whispered, "I keep hearing something in the walls, but when I check there's nothing there." Another added, "I saw movement in the maintenance cam, but it glitched before I could lock the feed." The general silenced them with one look and ordered, "Full system scan now, record every signal, every pulse, every flicker." Alara returned to her seat and pulled up the deeper waveforms, watching them twist and bend in strange patterns, like voices screaming without mouths or shapes trying to form from static. She closed her eyes for just a moment and listened, not with her ears, but with the part of her mind that learned from Captain Ryan, the part that trusted feeling overruled the part that once saved lives and got her grounded. And there it was again, a voice not in words, but in feeling, like sorrow wrapped in ice, like fear left floating for years. She opened her eyes and whispered to herself, "They're not gone, they're still here." The ship jolted, once not hard, but sharp enough to knock over 2 cups and trigger a red light on deck 3. "Report," came the captain's voice over comm. "All clear, sir, just a systems flicker," someone replied, but Alara felt the shift in the air. Something had changed. She turned to the general. "Sir, the signal is stronger now, and more focused. It's almost like it noticed us, and is reaching closer." General Karan stepped beside her and looked the same, screened the waveforms, now pulsing faster, brighter, as if something unseen had locked onto them. "Prepare for visual scan," he ordered. "Full spectrum now." The main window dark as coal began to glow as filters adjusted and gas clouds parted slowly, like curtains drawn by unseen hands, and in the distance something massive floated in silence. The crew gasped softly as the lights revealed the shape, a broken shadow shaped like a vessel, but wrong, twisted, stretched, old yet still whole. Alara's heart pounded. That's the Seraph's wing. No distress beacons, no lights, no movement, just a ghost ship staring back from the dark. As the ship drew closer, the voice in the signal grew louder, and Alara knew this was only the beginning. Something had survived, and it had waited for them to return. The Seraph's wing floated ahead like a giant skeleton in the dark, its hull covered in dust and scars from time and silence and cold space. And yet something about it felt alive, not in a normal way, but in a quiet, heavy way, like it had been waiting, not drifting. Alara stood at the front window, eyes wide, hands shaking, not from fear, but from something older, like memory, like grief reaching out from the past, as she stared at the ship her old mentor had once called home. General Karan gave the order, "Prepare the docking bay, keep weapons on standby, but do not fire unless I say so," and even his voice sounded slower, quieter, like he too felt the weight pressing in. As the ships aligned and the airlocks hissed open, Alara moved with the team down the long, narrow corridor, her boots echoing with every step, her fingers brushing the wall, as if the steel could speak and tell her what had happened. The door to the Seraph's wing groaned open, and a cold breath of air touched their faces, dry and stale, but still breathable, and that made no sense, not after 10 years, not in a ship left for dead. Lights flickered weakly as they stepped inside, some still working, some shattered, and strange patterns were drawn on the walls, not painted, not written, but carved with something sharp, something not made by human hands. Alara scanned the marks with her visor, her voice low. This isn't any known language, but parts of it look like warning symbols, or maybe messages, maybe something copied. The team spread out slowly, each step louder than the last. And everywhere they looked they found no bodies, no signs of struggle, no blood, no weapons, just silence, and the feeling of eyes watching from nowhere. In the control room the lights came on the moment Alara stepped inside, not full lights, but soft blue ones, as if the ship remembered her and welcomed her home. She moved to the main console and wiped away dust, revealing the old screen cracked, but working, and she touched the power switch with fingers that barely held steady. A flicker, and then the screen came to life, showing a frozen log, a recording from Captain Ryan, his face, tired eyes wide, as he whispered, "They live in the silence. Do not answer the call. If you hear them, run." Then the recording ended mid-word, and the screen shut down on its own. Alara stepped back, her heart thudding in her chest, her breath short, as she turned to the general, who stood behind her, arms folded, but eyes narrowed. "We need to go back," she said quietly. "This place is not empty. Something is still here, and it does not want us to understand it." General Coran nodded slowly, but before he could speak the floor trembled, not much, but enough to make one of the soldiers fall to a knee, and the lights dimmed, then flashed, then dimmed again. "Sir," said the technician on comm, "our ship just lost visual feed from your helmets, and exterior scans are getting static." The general replied, "Stay calm, stay alert, we will return soon, keep engines warm and ready." The hallway outside had changed, not in shape, but in feeling, the air colder, the lights dimmer, and the symbols on the wall now glowing faint red, like veins pulsing in metal skin. One crew member gasped and pointed to the far wall, where a shadow moved, but nothing was there when the lights flickered back. Alara touched the wall near the mark, and it pulsed under her fingers, like it felt her presence, like it remembered her voice from long ago, when she trained with Captain Ryan and listened to lost signals in the deep. "This ship was changed," she said quietly. "Something touched it, something not from Earth, not from any colony, and it learned from the crew, it copied them, or maybe it took something from them." They reached the med bay and found strange remains, not bones, not bodies, but shapes melted into the walls, as if metal had grown around something soft long ago. One of the soldiers turned pale and whispered, "We have to leave now. This place is not dead, it's dreaming." General Coran spoke into his calm, "Alara, get whatever data you can. We leave in 10 minutes. Prepare for jump." Alara moved quickly to the lower deck, where Ryan's old lab was, and inside she found another console, still powered, still blinking, as if waiting for her. She plugged in her tablet and began to copy the data, while behind her a soft sound echoed through the room, like breathing, not near, but not far. She turned fast, but saw nothing, only shadows, only shapes that shifted when the lights blinked. The tablet beeped, "Download complete." She ran back to the team, her voice steady, "But lo, we have what we need, let's go." As they walked back to the airlock, the floor vibrated again, and this time the lights turned red, fully red, and alarms sounded not from their ship, but from the Seraph's wing, as if it had awoken fully and wanted them to stay. The general shouted, "Move now," and the team ran through the passageway, as the air grew heavy and hot, and the walls seemed to close in. They leapt back into their own ship, just as the docking doors slammed shut behind them. As they pulled away, the Seraph's wing went dark again, floating, like before, silent and still, but Alara knew it had seen them, and something inside it remembered her face. The ship moved fast away from the Seraph's, wing engines glowing bright, as the crew tried to breathe again, tried to forget what they saw, but the memory stayed heavy in their minds, and even heavier in Alara's chest as she stared at the monitor, where the ghost ship still floated behind them, not chasing, not calling, just watching. She sat in her seat again, but her hands would not stop shaking, and her heartbeat felt like it echoed louder than the engine hum, and her thoughts spun in circles as the strange patterns played again on the screen near her station. Reeve turned to her with a look that was not cold this time, not sharp, but full of something like worry or respect or maybe fear, and said softly, "You saw it too, didn't you? The feeling, the presence, it was real." Alara nodded slowly and answered, "It was not just a ship. Not anymore. It's become something else, something that remembers." The general called a full crew meeting on the bridge, his voice calm, but firm as always, but his eyes held a shadow deeper than before. "We were not alone in that ship," he said slowly, "and we are not alone. Now the scans show movement on our ship, not from us, not from any system, just shapes that move when we don't look." The room went silent, and then a technician near the rear console whispered, "Sir, I just saw something near the reactor room, but there was nothing on the cameras, and when I checked it was gone." Alara stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. "I think they followed us not with ships, not with bodies, but with thought or energy or memory. Maybe something we woke up in that ship has found a way to cross into ours." The general nodded and motioned toward the control screen, where static flashed, then cleared, then flashed again in patterns that looked like signals, but not like anything known. "They feed on thought, on emotion," Alara said as the pieces in her mind connected like puzzle pieces falling into place. "They react to pain, to fear, to memory. They hear what we feel." The crew began whispering, some asking what could be done, others questioning if they were cursed or marked or if their ship would be next to fall silent in the dark. Alara walked to the center console and uploaded the data from Captain Ryan's lab, the files full of notes, warnings, sound maps, even rough sketches of shapes that matched the ones they now saw in the shadows of their own ship. Captain Ryan tried to speak to them, she said, her voice shaking, but steady. He tried to find language to match theirs, but the closer he got, the deeper they reached into him, until he lost control, until they took his voice, his body, his crew. General Coran looked at her and asked, "Can we stop it?" She paused, then answered, "Maybe we cannot stop them, but we can show them something they do not expect, something they cannot feed. Maybe we can blind them or confuse them or push them back." The general gave her a sharp look, say, "It's straight pilot. What is your plan?" Alara took a deep breath and said, "We fake a memory, a signal, so strong, so bright it pulls them into one spot, then we lock them there like a trap using the same patterns they use on us." It was dangerous, it was untested, it was wild, but the general nodded without hesitation and said, "Then do it." She and Reeve worked, fast fingers flying across consoles, building a signal from fragments of Ryan's old notes mixed with emotional echoes Alara recorded from her own memory, pain, hope, sorrow, and joy, all layered together into one loud voice in the silence. The lights flickered harder now, and one crew member screamed as a shadow passed through the wall near him, cold and fast, and gone in a blink. "They're inside the walls," someone shouted. "They're moving between places." Alara hit the button to send the signal, and across the ship speakers a sound like a song, but twisted, began to play notes, rising, falling, calling like a voice from far away. The movement stopped. All at once the shadows froze, and the static cleared, and a cold wind passed through the ship, like a breath being held, like a choice being made. Then the general gave the order, "Lock down the core, seal the pattern." Lights flashed all over, and the ship groaned, but the trap held, and the signal looped, and the presence pulled inward, like smoke drawn into a single jar. Alara watched the waveform flatten on her screen, and felt the air grow lighter, and Reeve whispered, "Is it done?" The general stepped forward, eyes sharp again, and said, "We are still here, and we are still flying." But Alara knew it was not the end, not really, because something old had seen them, and something new had heard them, and in the silence that followed she felt it still listening, not from far, not anymore, but from just beyond the walls. Alara sat alone in the lower chamber, where the lights buzzed and the cold pressed in from the metal walls, and her fingers moved across the control pad as she checked the signal loop again, and again, making sure it held steady, making sure the trap stayed closed. The rest of the crew stayed above in silence. No one spoke unless needed, no one laughed, no one dared break the quiet that had settled over them like a heavy blanket woven with fear and awe. General Coran stood on the bridge, his face hard as stone, but his hands tight behind his back, eyes fixed on the sensor board, where small ripples still blinked faintly like distant echoes of a thing they caught like memories, still trying to get free. Alara's voice came through the comms softly, "Sir, the signal is stable. But it won't hold forever. The shape inside is learning. It is pressing the pattern from inside." The general replied, "What happens if it breaks out?" She answered quickly, we lose control, and maybe more, it will learn every emotion, every weakness. It will no longer whisper, it will scream, and others may hear it and follow. He looked at the crew around him, then said, do what you have to do, pilot. Alara stared at the console screen where the waveform pulsed red and gold, and then she typed a final line of code, a self-destruct command for the signal trap set to fire deep into the void along with the data, the ghost, the memory, and the voice. But there was one problem. Someone had to guide the signal pod to the right path. Someone had to stand close enough to send it through the void and far away from Earth, far from any station or ship or home. She stood slowly and strapped the pack on her back, then picked up the small pod, glowing blue and warm like a heartbeat, in her hands. She opened the door to the hangar and stepped inside where shadows danced and her boots echoed with every step, and the silence felt alive again, not violent, not angry, but full of longing, full of old thoughts and forgotten pain. She spoke into the comm one last time, sir, I will launch it from the emergency deck. If I stay close enough, the connection will be clean, and the signal will reach into the deep, where no one can follow. General Coron's voice came back heavy, and low, Alara, that zone is unstable. If you stay too long, we may lose you. She smiled faintly and said softly, then wait for my voice, and if you hear nothing after that, go. Reeve stood by the lower hatch, her hands clenched at her sides, her eyes shining with things she could not say, and for the first time she reached out and touched Alara's shoulder and said quietly, I hated you when you came back, but now I see you were never wrong, just early. Alara nodded and passed through the hatch alone. She entered the outer ring, the oldest part of the ship, where gravity bent and lights flickered and old cables hung like vines in the dark, and she placed the pod on the control mount and linked her suit directly into the guide stream. The signal began to rise higher, brighter, faster, a beam of sound and memory, and thought blasting out like a flare into the dark. The void around the ship shook, not with sound, not with force, but with feeling, like the very space itself was pulling back in pain or in warning. Her headset rang with static and then with the voice again, but it was not the strange whisper this time. It was Captain Ryan's voice, soft and broken, saying, Alara, you heard me, you really heard me. She gasped as the signal shifted one last time, and then stabilized, bright and full and strong. So she called into the comm, it's done, send the pulse now. But there was no answer, only silence. Her heart dropped as she looked back through the window and saw the ship drifting away slowly like it was leaving. She called again, General, wait. Still no answer. Then a voice came back, not from the void, but from her headset, clear and full and strong. General Coron said, we are coming back for you, hold on. A small escape craft shot out from the ship, glowing bright through the haze, and pulled close just as her body began to shake from the energy burn and her suit alarm screamed. Reeve was the one flying. She shouted, grab my hand, and Alara reached and held tight. The escape pod rushed back toward the main ship just as the pod behind them burst in light and vanished into the deep. The trap had closed and the echo was gone. Back on the bridge, the crew stood still as Alara stepped inside, her body weak, but her face proud, and the general looked at her and said quietly, you were the signal that reached home. And Alara knew, then she was never just off the roster, she was the reason the mission even began.